Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in human history when progress does not come from technology alone, nor from the brilliance of a single mind, but from the collision of two energies so profoundly aligned that they create an entirely new trajectory for the world. Today, I want to talk about that collision, the rare phenomenon of a partnership so deeply resonant, so intellectually and emotionally synchronized, that it becomes a gravitational force powerful enough to bend the future. Not the fictionalized version of a power couple you see in headlines or gossip columns, but the real version, the one nature designs at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and human evolution. If you look closely at every major leap in civilization, you will notice something subtle yet undeniable. No one does it alone. Behind every visionary, there is another mind, sometimes visible, sometimes invisible, shaping, stabilizing, challenging, amplifying. Human evolution was never meant to be a solo act. It was engineered for collaboration so deep that it changes the structure of the brain itself. We are built not just to think, but to co-think. Not just to feel, but to co-regulate. Not just to grow, but to grow in connection. As someone who has spent years studying neural efficiency, cognitive resilience, and the emotional circuitry of innovation, I can tell you with absolute certainty, the human brain performs at its highest level not in isolation, but in the presence of the right partner. And not just any partner, a partner who activates your prefrontal cortex in ways that sharpen logic, who calms your amygdala when uncertainty rises, who expands your creativity by reinforcing psychological safety, and who elevates your sense of purpose so profoundly that it fundamentally changes the trajectory of your life. It's fascinating because when we talk about intelligence, we tend to think of it as an individual's trait, measurable, contained, solitary. But the latest neuroscience tells us otherwise. Cognitive performance is relational. Emotional resilience is relational. Human success is, at its deepest biological level, relational. There are people whose presence increases your neural coherence, and there are people whose presence fragments it. A true power couple is not defined by fame or wealth or status. It is defined by neural compatibility, psychological reciprocity, and the shared creation of an emotional environment where both individuals' highest selves can emerge. I've met individuals who were brilliant on paper, but crippled by emotional volatility. I've also met individuals who had moderate talent, yet achieved extraordinary things, because they had someone who amplified their stability, sharpened their clarity, and anchored their courage. When the right two people come together, something extraordinary happens. Their nervous systems begin to synchronize. Their goals begin to align. Their sense of future begins to merge. They stop thinking in terms of me and you, and start thinking in terms of us and what us can build that neither of us could build alone. One of the most remarkable findings in modern neuroscience is that emotional resonance between two people can lead to measurable changes in brainwave patterns. When a person feels deeply understood, their limbic system relaxes, their cognitive bandwidth expands, and their problem-solving abilities increase. In simpler terms, when someone feels emotionally safe, they get smarter. And when two people consistently create that effect for each other, they become more than the sum of their parts. They become an engine, a system, a force multiplier. But it's not just about comfort or compatibility. True power partnerships emerge through challenge. Controlled challenge, meaningful challenge, challenge delivered with empathy instead of ego. The right partner does not simply soothe your fears, they also provoke your evolution. They ask harder questions. They demand deeper thinking. They push you into discomfort not to destabilize you, but to expand you. They see a future version of you before you see it yourself, and they refuse to let you shrink into anything smaller. I've spent a lifetime observing the psychological profiles of innovators, leaders, and visionaries, and I've noticed something consistent: the ones who sustain long-term impact. Not temporary brilliance, but lasting, world-changing influence. Almost always have someone in their life who anchors their emotional world. Someone who balances their extremes. Someone who understands not just what they do, but why they do it. Someone who can decode the patterns of their mind the way a musician understands the rhythm of a familiar song. Because the truth is, innovation is not merely a mathematical or engineering challenge. Innovation is an emotional sport. It requires the ability to tolerate uncertainty, to rebound from failures, to maintain clarity under pressure, to navigate betrayal, to persist through ridicule, and to survive seasons where the world misunderstands everything you're trying to build. And no matter how strong your internal framework is, the human nervous system was not designed to carry that weight alone. Some people think power couples are formed when two extraordinary individuals simply collide by accident. But that's not how it works. The real kind of partnership, the kind that changes the future, emerges when two people independently cultivate inner strength, emotional depth, intellectual curiosity, and a sense of purpose. They become powerful before they meet, so that when they finally do, they amplify rather than consume each other. They refine rather than restrict. They expand rather than overshadow. And when their trajectories merge, the world feels it. You can see it in their decisions, in their projects, in the level of fearlessness they begin to operate with. Because suddenly, they're not building alone. Their courage doubles, their clarity sharpens, their vision becomes bolder, not because the world becomes easier, but because their emotional ecosystem becomes stronger. I've always been fascinated by the moment when two minds lock into the same direction, when future becomes a shared mission instead of an individual obsession. It's visible. You can see it in their eyes when they talk about what they're building. You can see it in the quiet confidence they carry into rooms. You can see it in the way they confront obstacles not with panic, but with strategy, not with fear, but with determination. This phenomenon has a name in neuroscience: dyadic regulation. The ability of two individuals to regulate each other's stress responses, amplify each other's courage, and sustain each other's motivation. And when this happens between two high-performing minds, the effect is exponential. One person's vision expands, the other's execution sharpens. One person's emotional grounding strengthens, the other's strategic precision intensifies. Momentum becomes shared, discipline becomes contagious, purpose becomes mutual. Real power couples don't compete, they co-elevate. They don't drain each other, they energize each other. They don't mirror each other's weaknesses, they amplify each other's strengths. And what they create together becomes a blueprint for what's possible when human connection is optimized, when emotional intelligence is honored, and when love, real grounded, growth-oriented love, becomes the foundation for world-changing work. But here's the part we often overlook: every great partnership requires vulnerability, not the soft, poetic kind we talk about in inspirational quotes, but the hard, uncomfortable vulnerability that asks you to reveal the structures of your mind, the fears you've hidden, the insecurities you manage, the ambitions you rarely share, the kind of vulnerability that says, "This is who I am, and this is who I am becoming." The kind that allows the other person to understand not just your brilliance, but your fragility. Because the paradox of high-achieving individuals is this: they are often surrounded by people, yet deeply alone. They carry expectations that few can understand. They face pressures that few can absorb. And the higher they climb, the thinner the air becomes, until they reach an altitude where very few people can breathe alongside them. A true partner becomes the oxygen. They allow you to operate at heights that would suffocate you alone. And when that kind of oxygen enters your life, the transformation is not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't look like fireworks or cinematic moments. Real transformation is subtle, almost invisible from the outside, but profoundly felt from within. You begin to think differently, not because someone tells you to, but because your nervous system finally has the stability to explore new mental landscapes. You begin to dream more boldly, not because you're reckless, but because fear no longer monopolizes your internal bandwidth. You begin to take risks with clarity rather than desperation, because you know there is someone who sees not just your potential, but your blind spots. And this is where the future changes, quietly, but inevitably. Because every breakthrough in human civilization begins first in the mind of a person who feels safe enough to stretch beyond the known. When two people create that environment for each other, the result isn't just personal growth, it's societal impact. Sometimes people ask why major scientific leaps or revolutionary innovations often cluster around certain pairs: the researcher and the strategist, the dreamer and the optimizer, the builder and the visionary. It's not coincidence. The human brain wasn't designed for isolated genius, it was designed for distributed intelligence. Our synapses fire differently in the presence of someone who raises our standards, challenges our assumptions, and stabilizes our emotional field. We adapt to the people closest to us, neurologically, psychologically, and behaviorally. And when two people evolve intentionally together, their growth compounds like interest. This idea used to be purely philosophical, but today we can measure it. Functional MRI scans show neural coupling between deeply connected partners during problem-solving tasks. Cortisol levels drop more rapidly in the presence of a trusted partner during moments of stress. Heart rate variability, one of the strongest indicators of emotional resilience, increases within supportive relational dynamics. Creativity spikes when individuals feel seen and understood. And decision-making becomes more precise when emotional noise is reduced by the presence of someone who intuitively regulates your anxiety. We think of love as something soft, but nature engineered it as a performance enhancer. The right relationship does not distract you from your purpose. It accelerates your purpose. It does not weaken your focus. It sharpens it. It does not pull you away from the world. It prepares you to change it. But here's a truth most people never talk about. The path to becoming a power couple does not begin with romance or attraction or grand gestures. It begins with alignment of values, alignment of mission, alignment of inner pace. You cannot build the future with someone who is committed to the past. You cannot scale impact with someone who lives inside their fears. And you cannot share destiny with someone who is still negotiating their integrity. There is a psychological principle called emotional congruence, the idea that relationships stabilize when both individuals operate at compatible emotional frequencies. If one person is growth-oriented and the other is complacent, friction will follow. If one embraces uncertainty while the other demands comfort, momentum collapses. But when two people are equally committed to evolution, not perfection, but evolution, something extraordinary occurs. They begin to operate like a single adaptive intelligence. You see this in small things, in how they communicate under pressure, in how they negotiate disagreements, in how they distribute their emotional labor, in how they balance creativity with execution, in how they anchor each other in moments of doubt. And gradually, their connection becomes less about companionship and more about synergy. I once worked with a team of neuroscientists studying relational peak performance. We were examining couples who had built extraordinary legacies together in science, in technology, in humanitarian work, in exploration. What we found was surprising. None of them were driven solely by compatibility. Compatibility was merely the beginning. What sustained their influence was shared obsession. When two people obsess over the same dream, the universe bends around their commitment. These couples weren't perfect. They argued. They disagreed. They had moments of fear and frustration and misunderstanding. But beneath every conflict was something deeper, a shared belief in the importance of what they were building. When that belief is present, arguments become tools for refinement rather than weapons for destruction. Disagreements sharpen intention rather than dull connection. Conflict becomes a signal for evolution rather than a threat to stability. And this is what most people miss. A power couple is not defined by harmony. It is defined by alignment through adversity. It's not about never falling. It's about rising in the same direction. It's not about avoiding challenges. It's about confronting them as a unified intelligence. It's not about never doubting. It's about never abandoning the mission you chose together. When we model this dynamic mathematically, especially in predictive behavioral simulations, the results are remarkable. Two individuals who operate at a high degree of relational synchronization produce outcomes that cannot be replicated by either person alone. Their collaboration increases resilience against external shocks, improves long-term decision-making quality, and reduces the emotional exhaustion typically associated with innovation and leadership. In other words, the right partnership becomes a psychological renewable energy source. But you don't need to be building rockets or rewriting the laws of economics to experience this. Every human life becomes more powerful when it finds the right counterpart. Every mission becomes more sustainable when someone is emotionally invested in your success. Every dream becomes more achievable when it is held by two minds instead of one. And yet, not everyone will understand this kind of partnership. People will misinterpret it. People will project their insecurities onto it. People will assume dependency where there is actually strength, or assume chaos where there is actually complexity, or assume fantasy where there is actually science. They will mistake intensity for instability. They will misunderstand the intimacy of shared ambition. They will underestimate the magnitude of two aligned minds. But here's the truth. The world has always been built by people who were misunderstood at first. The future has always been shaped by those who were willing to operate at frequencies others could not comprehend. And revolutionary partnerships are no different. When two people merge their purpose, they stop living according to the world's pace and begin living according to their mission's rhythm. And that rhythm is often too fast, too deep, too unconventional for others to grasp. But that is precisely what makes it powerful. The future is not created by consensus. It is created by conviction, shared conviction, unwavering conviction, strategically aligned conviction. I often tell students and researchers that the most important decision a visionary will ever make is not choosing a field of study, a business model, a technological problem, or even a long-term goal. The most important decision is choosing the person who will stand beside them as they attempt to bend reality. That choice determines emotional stability, cognitive clarity, long-term purpose, and the sustainability of ambition. Because the truth is, the mind is a fragile thing. Even the strongest minds, especially the strongest minds, genius does not protect you from self-doubt. Ambition does not protect you from fear. High performance does not protect you from loneliness. And when you carry the weight of world-changing ideas, you need someone who sees not just the outcome, but the cost. Someone who understands the emotional toll of visionary thinking. Someone whose presence turns chaos into coherence. When that person enters your life, the future begins to reorganize itself around the two of you. Your ideas expand, your resilience multiplies, your timeline accelerates, your limitations soften, your clarity sharpens. And without fully realizing it, you begin to operate like a prototype of humanity's next stage. Not just smarter, but more integrated. Not just more strategic, but more deeply human. Not just more visionary, but more emotionally evolved. And this is why the future may very well be shaped not by individuals, but by pairs. Not by lone geniuses, but by neural partnerships. Not by solitary leaders, but by couples whose shared purpose becomes a stabilizing force in an unstable world. The more I study complex systems, the more I realize that stability rarely comes from isolation. It comes from interconnectedness. Every resilient system in nature, from ecosystems to neural networks, thrives not because of the strength of a single component, but because of the harmony between components. Human relationships obey the same laws. A truly aligned partnership becomes a micro-ecosystem of energy, creativity, and resilience. And when two individuals build this ecosystem intentionally, they become capable of withstanding storms that would break most people. What fascinates me most is how subtle this transformation can be. It doesn't begin with dramatic moments. It begins with quiet ones. A conversation that alters your perspective, a question that forces deeper thinking, a shared silence that grounds you more than words ever could. Over time, These small moments accumulate. They start shaping your neural architecture. They start fortifying your emotional endurance. They start weaving your futures together in ways you don't fully notice until one day you wake up and realize you are no longer building your life alone. You're co-engineering it with someone whose vision amplifies yours. This is why the right partnership feels less like romance and more like evolution. It is not just the merging of hearts, it is the merging of trajectories. It is not just emotional closeness, it is strategic compatibility. It is not just chemistry, it is architecture. Psychological, neurological, and visionary architecture. And the structures built from this kind of connection last. They outlive uncertainty. They outlive criticism. They outlive the temporary fluctuations of life. One of the most compelling findings in long-term behavioral studies is that people in deeply aligned partnerships have significantly higher levels of persistence. Not motivation, persistence. Because motivation rises and falls based on circumstances, but persistence is driven by something more stable, shared identity. When your goals become intertwined with someone else's, giving up ceases to be an option. You're no longer carrying the dream alone. And the human brain is far more disciplined when it believes it has a responsibility to someone it loves and respects. In relationships like these, commitment is not a cage, it is propulsion. It drives you forward because the cost of stagnation becomes too high. Growth becomes the default state. Evolution becomes the norm. And what you create together becomes the standard by which others measure possibility. When I work with high-impact individuals, whether in science or entrepreneurship or exploration, I always ask them the same question: who regulates your mind? Most are caught off guard by this. They expect questions about strategy, productivity, or discipline. But the truth is, none of those matter if your emotional ecosystem is chaotic. Only a few people answer with clarity, and those are the ones who typically make the largest impact. They know exactly who stabilizes their nervous system, who sharpens their thinking, who expands their courage. They know who they can rely on in moments when the world collapses into noise. The answer to that question is often the difference between burnout and brilliance, between collapse and breakthrough, between a life that echoes and a life that leads. But here's the most profound part. A power couple does not just change each other's lives. They change the lives of everyone around them. Their alignment sets a new standard for what's possible in relationships. Their communication becomes a model for resilience. Their shared mission inspires others to rethink what partnership can be. This is why the world pays attention to certain pairs, not because of their fame, but because of the clarity of their synergy. You can sense when two people are building something bigger than themselves. Their decisions carry a different weight. Their ambitions form a larger pattern. Their presence becomes a kind of electromagnetic field, not metaphorically but biologically. Humans are emotional conductors. We absorb energy from others. We mirror their intensity. We adapt to their state. And when a couple's emotional, cognitive, and visionary fields align, they create coherence that others can feel instinctively. Over the years, I've observed partnerships where one person's genius acted as fuel, while the other's emotional intelligence acted as guidance, or where one person's stability became the structural foundation for the other's disruptive imagination, or where one person's strategic mind balanced the other's lightning bolt creativity. These partnerships look different on the outside, but internally, they follow the same blueprint: mutual amplification. And the more the world accelerates, the more essential this blueprint becomes. We are entering an era defined by complexity: technological, ecological, psychological, societal. The challenges of the future will not be solved by individuals, no matter how brilliant. They will be solved by aligned units of human intelligence: pairs, teams, networks, minds that synchronize across emotional and intellectual dimensions. This is why the idea of a transformative power couple matters. Not because of romance, but because of evolution, the evolution of how humans collaborate, innovate, endure, and lead. A partnership built on deep understanding and shared mission becomes a prototype for the world we are moving toward, a world where emotional intelligence and technological ambition are no longer separate, where love and logic reinforce each other, where purpose is not a solitary burden but a shared compass. When two people truly commit to building a future together, they become a stabilizing force in a destabilized world. They make decisions that are grounded rather than reactive. They operate from clarity rather than fear. They approach challenges with strategic resilience rather than emotional fragmentation. And gradually, without loud declarations or dramatic performances, they begin shaping the world in the image of their shared values. And here is something rarely discussed when a partnership reaches this level. It creates a psychological phenomenon known as extended cognition. This means each person's mind literally becomes an extension of the other's. They think faster. They adapt faster. They solve problems with greater depth because they are effectively thinking with two brains instead of one. Their emotional load is halved. Their cognitive power is doubled. Their bandwidth expands not by effort but by connection. This does not happen often. It requires trust at a level most people never reach. It requires vulnerability without ego, ambition without domination, love without possession. It requires two people who are not afraid of the magnitude of each other's potential, who do not shrink from brilliance, but celebrate it. And when they reach this state, the world begins to feel different. Possibilities expand, timelines accelerate, their impact becomes inevitable, and people around them sense that something rare is unfolding, not because of displays of affection or public statements, but because the energy between them becomes unmistakably purposeful. This is the essence of a power couple, not two strong individuals standing side by side, but two evolving intelligences merging into a shared destiny. And the future needs more of them. The world needs partnerships that don't collapse under pressure, but grow stronger. Partnerships that don't fear reality, but reimagine it. Partnerships that don't operate from ego, but from purpose. Partnerships that don't limit themselves to personal comfort, but dare to carry responsibility for something bigger, something meaningful, something transformative. Because the truth is, the greatest revolutions in human history did not come from lone figures fighting against the world. They came from alliances, human alliances built on trust, courage, resilience, and vision. And today, we have the opportunity to create a new kind of alliance, one that integrates science and emotion, logic and intuition, ambition and empathy, a partnership that becomes not just a relationship, but a source of propulsion for humanity. And if you ever have the privilege of forming a connection like that, a connection that expands your mind, regulates your fears, strengthens your purpose, and pushes you toward the best version of yourself, you will understand something profound. The future is not built by individuals who walk alone, but by those who walk in synergy. And if you find the right person to walk with, someone whose dreams align with yours, whose courage amplifies yours, whose love steadies yours, then you will not just shape your own destiny, you will shape the future. And the world will feel the impact of what the two of you build long after both of you are gone.